that, I'll stop sharing and pass it on to you, Swati.
Sounds good. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Maybe a minute. All right, let me know if you're able to see my screen. Yeah. All right, sounds good. I have to admit, I don't use Zoom that often, so bear with me if I make newbie mistakes in using it. So hi, everyone. I am Swati Doshi. I am a principal product manager at Microsoft. And like Marco mentioned, actually, Chris Schaefer is my manager. And we've been in this space of learning and onboarding for a little while. So we would love to, my goal is to come and not only share what we are doing, but discuss with you what works for you, what doesn't, and learn from each other, frankly speaking. And so before we, go into onboarding and program maturity and all of that, let's start with addressing probably the elephant in the room right now, right? Which is, we know there's talk of recession in the industry. We know that as an overall, hiring has, it went gung-ho for a few years in the IT industry. And then right now it's a little bit more stagnated and there's lower hiring going on. So the question to ask very realistically is like, why is this even a conversation? Why are we talking about onboarding new hires? Why does it even matter? Right. And from that perspective, I don't know how many of you have heard of SHRM, which is a Society for HR Management, and they do a wonderful job of looking at, the big picture, right? What's happening in the industry around various domains, including onboarding. And here's some interesting data from them on what they have observed in this space. So 2 data points that, and there's a whole ton of things that they share, right? But 2 interesting data points for us to talk about before we go into it is, what does onboarding lead to and why does it matter, right? So number 1 is good organized onboarding programs help towards making new hires more productive. In fact, numbers show that 62% greater productivity for new hires if you had a defined onboarding program and process. And then the second data point is the value add to the company when you think about onboarding, because we all know intuitively, well, it must be costing more than just hiring a new person. Well, they provide us more numbers, specific numbers. It's about 3 to 4 times the salary of a new hire. So think about these 2 data points, right? You hire somebody in and you can help them be more productive faster. And we know greater productivity leads to greater satisfaction for the new hire because they joined for a reason. They found your company to be worth joining. They thought this was going to be a great place for them. So what we are helping them, by helping them be more productive sooner, we're helping them feel more satisfied and more happy about joining. And then the second part of it is, if you're thinking pragmatically and practically for the company, if it's going to cost 3 to 4 times to hire a new person, well, we definitely want to spend less on that aspect of it. And if employees are satisfied, they're staying longer, retention, it improves retention, right? And so that's why even in today's industry where we stand today, this is important. And I would even say even more important, we have less discretionary money. We are spending less, we want to spend less all the time, but when you have less discretionary money and when you're having fewer people enter through the door, it's the onus is on us as program owners of onboarding programs to do a better job with what we're doing. And it helps the new hire, and it helps your group, and it helps the company. So that's my important argument on why it matters, and even potentially even more today. So I'm going to speak about onboarding at Microsoft. What are the complexity? What are the challenges? Why that led us to create a program maturity model, but also speak in terms of what our learnings are and insights we get, and both in terms of at a broader Microsoft level, we are a big company and how do we benefit, but also how the groups that we are working with benefited even at an individual level, and which would translate to smaller teams, smaller groups as well, because being data informed is applicable and valuable at all levels and at all sizes. And so that I'd love to have that conversation as well, calling out where it's helping us, and also have pause me in between if you want to ask, so how do you think it will help if my group is smaller? So before I go in and start talking to all of them, I would love your help to help me level set and help me understand, the audience better. So I had 2 questions for you. The first question is, with a yes or no in the chat window, let me understand are you involved in onboarding in your groups today? Or it's okay if you're attending because you're like, hey, this is an interesting topic. I love the session plus sets up and I just want to attend. So yes or no, you're actually involved in onboarding, or no, you're not involved in onboarding. So simple yes or no in the chats, and Marco and Tomomi just help me keep an eye.
Mostly yeses.
Yeah, lots of yeses. Yeah.
Gotcha. And it helps me level set, right? Because there are certain things that I don't want to just assume, right? That, oh yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So sounds like this is mostly yeses. I can make some assumptions, but that doesn't mean that if you don't know, you cannot stop me. So do pause me if you're like, hey, what do you mean by that? And the second question was to help me get a sense of the size of the onboarding that's going on. And rather than asking about how many new hires, because that number keeps changing over time, right? Especially between today and maybe last year, just help me understand the size of your groups, organizations, teams, whatever that is that you operate in. Is it lesser than 200 people in your group or greater than 200 people?
And when you say a group, it's the entire team, right? The organization.
Yeah. Whatever level, at the level at which you are doing onboarding or involved in onboarding, is it with the team sizes less than 200 or greater than 200? All right, so looks like a mix, right? Right around 200, Ben. So seems like we have a mix, right? That's good. Thank you for the context, and it'll help me know what to focus on as we discuss. All right, so let's jump into our agenda. So starting with, onboarding is complex. Again, seeing that a lot of you are already doing onboarding, I'm preaching to the choir. The key part I wanted to call out is the aspects of onboarding that make it complex for us, some of it which is generic and some of it which is Microsoft specific. From a generic nature, onboarding, as you know, has many elements, right? There's the very tactical, your badge, your laptop, your, getting you into the company, giving you an ID kind of stuff. The other one is around, technical onboarding, helping you ramp up in the feature team, the feature group, the technology that's being used so that you feel ready to jump in and start being productive. And then the third one is the ephemeral things, which are, getting you understanding the culture of the company, having you understand the mindset of the company, and being part of and feeling as part of the network that is there at the company. So all of these are different aspects of onboarding already. For Microsoft, there's one more dimension that gets added in, the size part of it, right? Like Marco, you mentioned earlier, because we are such a large company, what ends up happening is these different aspects of onboarding get broken down by who's working on it or not. Something is pure HR. Something is happening at a much higher organization level, and we have organizations which can sometimes be really large, right? 10,000 organizations, 10,000 people in size, or engineering in size. And then there are things that are happening at a more local or sub-organization or a division level. So all of this, given at the end of the day, makes onboarding a complex ecosystem. And what we realized is, and I think this will resonate with you, is because of this, there are gaps in our onboarding. Very realistically, we sometimes, unfortunately, drop the ball between the different entities who are playing a role in the onboarding of a new hire. And then there are places where there are redundancies. And all said and done, we are all here to do the key goal is providing a great experience to the new hire. And admittedly, what's happening here because of either these gaps or redundancies is we realized that we were ending up providing a suboptimal experience in some cases because of the challenges of onboarding. So that's kind of where we kicked in, for me, as we mentioned earlier, I'm in this, tiny but powerful learning team, and we look at what it helps us do is we work across all of engineering. So what and I've been in this role of being an onboarding, I lead a community of onboarding program owners who are hundreds of onboarding program owners that I coordinate with, work with on an ongoing basis for the last several years. And what that helped do is, and privileged me to understand, is look at onboarding at a 10,000 foot level. Understand what's going on, what are our strengths, what are our opportunities. And within that, a few years back, we noticed an interesting few patterns that emerged. One was, as I mentioned, understanding that, there's a particular meaty aspect of onboarding around the helping new hires understand the group's culture, the technology that is happening at the, that they need to know to work with this group, and things of that sort and nature happening at a sub-org or a division level at the end of the day in our onboarding. So there's something that HR was doing, something that the overall organization was doing, but there was a lot of meaty work that was happening at a smaller scale and at a more localized. The second part that we understood is that our onboarding, on one end, the strength of onboarding was giving teams autonomy and authority in deciding what they want to do for the onboarding program. Well, there was a flip side. There's always a pro and a con to everything. And the con of this was, while it came with autonomy, it also came with obfuscation of, or no standardized, there's no scaffolding. So you were left to kind of deal with it yourself and figure out what's an onboarding program, what do we want to do? And a lot of teams were starting from scratch for themselves. And so we were not collaborating that well. We were not sharing knowledge that well. So that's kind of where we kicked in, which is this realization helped us think about, oh, we understood what's the complexity. We understood particular places where we could add more value. And so with the help of a V team, I came up with a program maturity model, which is, of course, what we're going to talk about. But essentially, what it helped us figure out is how do we look at simplifying this ecosystem? How do we help with providing more scaffolding and guidance to these onboarding program owners? With obviously the end result being, how do we provide a more streamlined program for a new hire? Because that's our end goal, right? How do we make them more productive? How do we make them be a part of the ecosystem sooner? All right, so let's discuss what the program was. How did we go about it? What are we doing? So if we figured, let's start with the reducing the complexity part of it. How do we make it more digestible? How do we help teams look at it in a more methodical manner? So what we did was essentially kind of almost provide a funnel, right? All of that chaos, all of that complexity, simplifying first in terms of the terminology, the language that we're using, as well as how do we look at onboarding in a more holistic way. So we first looked at it as, we said, let's break this down into buckets, right? Into dimensions. And we help teams look at their onboarding program across 3 dimensions. The elements of the program, and I'll of course go into all of these a little bit more in the coming slides, but essentially the 3 buckets are various program elements, the duration, the structuring, and things like that. What metrics and measurements are you collecting around your onboarding program? And then the third thing is the content itself, and how you look at the content, and how do you look at providing the content to the new hire in terms of times and delivery and timelines. So we break it down into these elements, and then as I go into the next slides, I'll talk about double clicking into some of these to help them think about their program more holistically as well as more granularly at the same time. And then we have the maturity cycle in terms of helping them assess the program, review and plan better, and then improve it. And then it's a cycle, right? Because one, you continue to have new hires coming in. Second, your program will and should change over time to take into account what else is happening around you. So we'll talk about the circular nature of this and how we can kind of continue benefiting as we go along year over year. All right, so let's talk about the maturity model and the impact cycle and how we are implementing it. So we start with the fundamental, right, which is helping groups assess their program. What we've done is two things here. One is, so obviously it started with us first too, right? For us to understand and define an onboarding program, we looked at, well, what would be needed? And we did both external and internal research, research to see what information is available around onboarding, setting up onboarding programs and all in the industry, in various places, as well as look inward and say, what are we learning about Microsoft itself? So because we'd already been doing that research, we first did a simple thing, convert it into an open, transparent document that we can share with the rest of the, the onboarding community. So it converted into now, over time, it's become a SharePoint site where we share this guidance. We share a combination of information along with research data so that people can continue, our own program can mature and we continue giving them deeper and deeper insights and information on setting up programs and how to think about them. So there's a guidance, and it goes hand in hand with a simple tool. We've used Power App to do it, but who cares? You can use any tool, right? Essentially, it's a very simple mechanism for now that we have the scaffolding on what a holistic program would look like. We are using a Power App as a tool to ask them questions, right? And guide them through it. So it's a very simple set of questions, 12, 13 questions that we guide them to say, tell us more about your program. And in fact, here, it reminds me, when I'd come earlier, when I come for pilot, when to talk about pilot one, there's a distinction between that and now. So here's some learnings we had. So we had asked questions in a particular way before, which was actually we thought we were simplifying it. We were like, you consider yourself in phase one for a particular subcategory. If you're doing this, this, and this, and at phase two, if you're doing this next level. And one of the feedback we got from them was, it was too generalized. They're like, well, we are doing some things in onboarding, we are already ahead of the curve from other teams and doing, think about automation. What are you automating? What are you not? We were like, oh, if you're automating, consider yourself at phase 4, right? Or something like that. And they said, well, that's not true. We are automating some aspects of our onboarding and not others. And so we don't know where to put ourselves. So our learning from there was, we actually realized that depending on where your groups are at and companies are, sometimes just asking simple questions and breaking down into, do you do this or do you not, actually is more effective. And so this is one feedback we have definitely got from the second round of pilot, that the teams who have been with us through the whole journey for pilot 1 and pilot 2 have said, this is more effective. Breaking it down into simpler questions and just asking us, are you doing, are you not, is helping us evaluate at a more granular level, but then start getting the big picture in a better way than if you just ask us generic questions. So we start with assessment, we give them a guideline, we give them a simple assessment. What that leads to is the outcome of self-assessing your program is, we give you for all of those 3 dimensions that I mentioned, and then the subcategories within that dimension. For each of that subcategory, we help give them an assessment. At what phase are you at? Inception, growth, or maximizing value? So are you at a beginning level, in a middle level, or you're already a more mature for that subcategory? So what we then encourage teams to do is pause, look at what the assessment is, go back to the guidance, and now utilizing the key thing they come with is they understand their program, they understand what needs to happen for their new hires, what are they hearing from them, and so we ask them to look at all of that to decide, where is our program at, where are the areas, where are our strengths, and where are our areas of opportunity, and then knowing what they know, the unique thing they get is they understand their programs best, understand where do we want to double click and focus into. Of all the things you could do in onboarding, which are the ones of most value for your group, and then, decide on that, and that's where you form a plan. So we specifically ask them, don't peanut butter it. Don't try to make everything better slightly. Identify a few focus areas, which will be the biggest ROI, the biggest benefit for your new hires, and go deeper into them. Pick a period of time, focus on those areas, take them to the next level, and then come back again and reevaluate and figure out what to do next. The third dimension of this is improvement over time. And in our case, what we are getting value out of is the more groups that assess, the more we have aggregated data. So what we are starting to do is, so there are two approaches to data-driven here, right? One is your own self-assessment, which itself is powerful, which itself, and along with the research data and guidance, is helpful to make informed decisions. We are benefiting from having more and more groups to it, because now you start seeing the general patterns. So the value add of this is in terms of more opportunities to look at what the big picture is, where are our overall strengths and opportunities, where are areas where we could also collaborate and bring efficiencies from that angle. So if there is more than one group doing onboarding and they are having the same areas of opportunities, they could collaborate and share resources and share knowledge and work together on it. It also, of course, leads to financial efficiency if rather than individual groups spending time and effort individually, right? And also learning from each other. So if some groups are more mature, we are starting to dip into that and understand, what did you do? How did you do? What can we learn from it and piggyback on it? All right, any questions at this stage? And just to give you more insight, I'll talk a little bit more about the assessment model, discuss a little bit more about it, and then talk about the learnings that we are getting from individual groups as well as at the aggregated level. All right, so I'll continue from here, but of course, please feel free to pause me, ask questions, either by raising your hand in Zoom or by putting your questions in the chat. All right, so this is what I was talking about, right? The three dimensions that we first asked the questions in, the various elements of the program, the metrics and measurement, and the content. This is a heavy slide and I won't drain the whole slide, but just to give you a sense of where this is helping, and also irrespective of the size of your group and organization, why this is valuable. So the big picture here to take away is getting a sense of onboarding, not as individual elements of onboarding programs, which is what we notice many teams do. You form a new group, you have, and you're like, okay, we are going to set up an onboarding program, and you start working on what's the most familiar. Like, maybe we should, communicate with the new hire and tell them about certain trainings and things like that. Or maybe we should, if you're assigning buddies, let's make sure the buddies assign. So you will go for the things that are most familiar. But we look at an onboarding program, there's so many elements to it, right? So what this helps you look at is, look at onboarding as a holistic thing. What are the various elements of onboarding? Are you thinking about structuring your program? What kind of support teams are you providing? Have you thought about, are there aspects that need to be automated? And have you thought about it, right? What metrics are you doing? And so forth. The key takeaway for groups, irrespective of your size, is getting that sense for your onboarding. Whatever the level of onboarding that's happening, whatever degree that you're doing it, look at it as a holistic. What are the various elements you would look at? Now, we did both external, got data from external industry as well as internal Microsoft to come to this list. And frankly speaking, I'm totally aware not the entire list is going to be applicable to you. Some of it matters more, some of it matters less, some of it doesn't matter. But I can see with fairly high confidence, having spoken to people, at least definitely inside Microsoft and some outside, that elements of this will resonate and you will have your own. So that's the starting point. That the biggest message over here is, look at your onboarding not as individual components, but as a program owner. First, look at the holistic picture on what aspects of onboarding would matter. And then you can start discussing and figuring out what you care about more, because you understand your new hires, your company, your culture, and your focus at that period in time. Does that make sense? Anything on any particular part of this that you'd like me to kind of just double click a little bit more into? Now, one example that comes to mind, by the way, for me is metrics is a good example, because this is always the, people are trying to figure out, what to measure and what not. For us, we realize at this stage in time, even simple things matter, right? So we have questions and metrics, for example, like, are you surveying your new hire? Are you managers, buddies? Are you getting the data from the, are you have a program, you're running the program. What data are you getting to know? How effective is it? And usually these three entities are the common ones across most onboarding programs, the new hire themselves, obviously, and you want to know how is the onboarding program working for them? Is it working or not? The manager themselves, like, are they equipped or are they not in their role for a new hire that joins their company, not just some, managers have lots of reports and they have a responsibility on, being an excellent manager. But with new hires, there's slight nuances, and are they recognizing and identifying what their role is? And on a similar note, buddies, have you assigned buddies, and are they understanding of what role they play? And that's an important part in today's where we have virtual onboarding, and employees new hires are more and more say they feel isolated and they don't know how to communicate and they don't know how to network better. Right. So we ask them about, are you, we help nudge them towards that and asking, are you serving these entities? These are some of the primary entities. And then the next one we ask is, what is the response rate? And that's, interestingly enough, many teams will say, oh, yep, we are surveying. And then when they pause and say, oh, well, actually, we haven't checked actually recently, what is the response rate? And the reason we do that is, if you're in the field of data science, you may have already heard about that. Your response rate matters in terms of determining how to utilize that response rate to make data-driven decisions. So, for example, if you surveyed 100 people and 10 of them answered, if your response rate is 10%, how reliable is that data? And it's not that it's not unreliable, it's unreliable, by the way. So that's the interesting thing, that it is reliable, but in a different way. You have to understand what credibility you give to it. Is your focus going to be on increasing the response rate? Or based on the response rate and who has responded, could you make informed decisions even today? Right? And it's going to be in the middle somewhere. By the way, a lot of information on this already exists externally. So this is not Microsoft specific. If you looked up response rates and metrics and all of that, you learn a lot from outside, enough to have already start implementing and utilizing it inside your company.
Swati, Sandy had a question about learning evaluation metrics. What some examples of that might be?
So Sandy, of all the things that is, not my strength, learning evaluation is one of them. So actually, we have a team member who has, whose specialty is learning. And so she would actually, if she was here, she would be the right person to answer it. But more at a general level, what I can answer is, usually what happens is people, teams, provide training. They look at things as training new hires, giving them, setting up boot camps or sessions and things like that. Learning evaluation is the field that goes into, well, you said you provided what you thought the person needed. Learning starts looking at it from their angle on, did they get and receive what you gave, and was it helpful for them? So that's the part. And Sandy, we know each other a little bit. So I can actually connect you with Amber on our group to look at it in more detail, because there is learning evaluation itself has phases to it. And there's a particular way that you have, it has its own maturity level on how you are looking at how the employees are receiving the learning, how is it helping them grow, how do you evaluate before and after, and its impact on productivity.
Yeah, we've been in this weeds for quite a while now, trying to, come up with the best ways of evaluating the learning, besides just, you had the learning objective, and yes, the person can do the learning objective that, that you did, but when it goes into being productive and go into, showing that they're confident in what they're able to do, we've been, trying to find the best way to measure that across the board, right? We find certain ways to do it in certain scenarios, but not across the board. So it'd be interesting to learn more about that.
Yeah, and maybe we could have, we could check with Amber. Maybe she could come and talk just on that topic. She's definitely an expert on it. And as I mentioned, learning evaluation itself is a science, and there are maturities to it as your group grows through capturing that data, utilizing that data to make more informed decisions. Great question, though. Thank you. All right. So I mentioned earlier that when teams assess their program, we basically made a very, so let me actually back up. So when teams assess their program, I mentioned those dimensions and then the subcategories in the dimensions that we asked them questions on. We made a very conscious decision early on to say we were not going to give an assessment for the entire program at this stage. Not, like, hey, you are inception, growth, or maximum value for your program as an overall, but at the subcategory level. And it was very specific. There was a specific reason for it. We don't want at the place where onboarding programs are at today, there's so many aspects, as we discussed, it's a complex area and there's lots of different aspects of onboarding that play a role. And we didn't want the teams to get into a complacent state if their overall answer was, well, we are in growth phase. Seems like we're doing fine overall, or, we are. So we wanted them to look at individual components and say, how are we doing in this subcategory? Where and why are we at a particular phase and what does it look like? And also then help them look at it as then at a holistic to say, where are we majority at inception? Where are we at growth and where at maximum value? And within that, what would we like to focus on? So that's kind of the conscious decision we made. The one thing I wanted to share here, I'm going to be sharing some quotes and things that we had from the pilot members, and it's less to gloat about, oh, they said this is awesome, but more to share what we are learning, because obviously we are also learning certain things that are going well and certain things that are not. The key takeaway at this, that the holistic level was the two things that teams shared as they went through the MVP. One was that holistic aspect of it. So many of them called out that this is the first time I'm looking at my program as an overall, looking at all the dimensions, look at all the subcategories we should be looking at. And it's helping us assess the program differently than just the individual elements that we had been doing. Of course, the data-driven approach is helpful on two folds. Your own assessment, your own data that can help you look at things year over year. And then, of course, if you are in the place where you have multiple groups and you can assess at individual groups, the aggregated nature can also help you make more informed decisions. I'm keeping an eye on the questions. I'm not seeing anything right now, but please feel free to pause me at any time. So I'm knowingly sharing data that we got and learnings that we had for teams which more or less were at inception for most of their program. So the first thing to address is, you'd say Microsoft is such a mature company. Why would there be groups which are still at earlier inception level for their programs? That's because we're such a big company, but that means we are reorging often. We have new product lines that come out. There are new teams that get formed. And what it means is they are in the same boat as you, right? If you are a new company and you're setting an onboarding program, they're the same boat of, like if some of you are starting new programs, you'll feel like, well, Microsoft is mature. Kinda. As a company, we are mature, but there are many aspects that we do, including onboarding, where if things are new, if groups are new, we'll still be in the exact same phase where we are seeing areas where we need to grow, we have to develop, we have to mature. So one of the things, our learnings for groups which are in inception phase was, what did they get out of it, right? The step-by-step guidance. So the holistic nature still applied. In fact, I'll tell you one of the takeaways from some of the group was very truthfully, damn, that's a lot. Like, oh, shoot. I felt, in a sense, addressing smaller things felt more like I had a handle on it. And now I'm getting a big picture. I'm like, oh, shoot, onboarding is big and there's a lot of things. But very truthfully, the next thing they also, however, still called out is, hey, but you know what? I'd rather know what I did not know. Now I feel more informed. I understand what all is there. But because there's some guidance that goes with it, it's helping us make more informed decisions on everything that we could do, which are the ones that we are going to choose, right? And this comes back to my earlier point. You know your program best, you know what is happening. And so you are in a better position to make more informed decisions, including when you discuss with your V team, with your leadership team on how do we go about it. By the way, that's the other value of this, right? It actually gave them a terminology, a language, and a mechanism to have the conversation with the leadership team as well. So several of them came back and said, this provides me a better mechanism to discuss our onboarding program. That, hey, here are all the various components. So we are all looking at it together. We are all looking at it and saying, what what is happening, where are we at, and we are making decisions together on, of all these things, what do we want to focus on. Also enables them to then track it with the leadership team, right? They say, oh yeah, we all decided together, we are going to do blah, right? We are going to focus on structuring a program in a particular way, or we are going to put in more efforts in automating certain aspects of onboarding. And then 3 months down, 6 months down, when they have the continuing conversation, they can revisit it with that, so they have a baseline, they have determined what they want to work on, and then they can see what progress are they making and what do they work on next. On a similar note, the other side of it, right? Groups which are already mature, is there value to them? What kind of value do they get? So for us, some of the groups, what it is helping them do is, start thinking about how do onboarding OKRs and metrics, but how to set up specific OKRs and metrics around onboarding, and how to bubble that up into the overall metrics that the teams gather around employee satisfaction, employee signals and things like that. So that's one of the things that they are using it for. The other things that mature teams are doing is they are starting to dip into, Sandy, as you mentioned, productivity. Understanding employee productivity is a hard nut to crack, right? Is it one aspect of it is the first check-in that they did? Well, that's one aspect. There are other. So some of our mature teams are starting to dip deeper into that. How do you utilize check-in data and other data, clear it up to understand employee productivity and what can we do to improve it? What are we doing today? And things like that. And then again, sharing that back with teams which are more at an inception or a growth stage so that they can piggyback on it once they are ready for it. Any questions? Are you seeing anything that resonates with what's happening at your end, by the way?
I have a quick question.
Sure, Sunny.
So when you're talking about teams that are building onboarding programs, are the teams themselves actually creating the content, or is that being outsourced to other SMEs within the organization or externally?
Great question, Sandy. And reality is a mixed bag, right? When it comes to about our team, about our culture, about our technology, then a lot of it is internal, right? And it's a combination of, sometimes there are particular things that SMEs are producing, other things which, depending on what level or degree of complexity is required, a lot of team members kind of volunteer and help create the content. And then the other thing we see is a lot of teams will do have this content in OneNote or documents or things like that, and then it's kind of keeping it refreshed is one of the things that they have to figure out, right? Again, as I mentioned, truthfully, it's a mixed bag even across that. Is it the new hire themselves that sometimes help keep it refreshed, because they will identify some, they'll ask a question, right, to a SME or to their buddy, and then they realize, oh, oops, this is outdated, and then they use that as a way to keep it refreshed all the time. In some teams, depending on, again, what that work is, some work may be outsourced to content, but generally we have heard it as internal. That's is that fair, Chris? That's how I have generally seen it as.
Sure. And again, it's everything, because we have so much size and complexity, but we encourage teams to curate as much as possible and reuse from other teams. So if 5 teams within a sub-organization are all creating essentially duplicate content, that's just a huge waste of time. And so we work to try to have them coordinate with each other so that within a given division or whatever, if there's something they want to get out to everybody, that gets created once and then they all leverage it. And then, but even better, like when you're talking about culture, most of the culture content should be coming from the company, and it already exists. Many content on various technologies, content already exists either inside Microsoft or in the industry. And so stop creating so much, unique stuff and focus your time on curating the best of what's available, and then only create what is absolutely unique and specific to your situation. Generally, engineering teams like to think of themselves as snowflakes, where they're completely different from everyone else, so 100% of the content needs to be created, and that's just not true. But what is true is they're not exactly the same as everybody else. There is unique aspects. So our challenge is teasing apart what needs to be aligned, what needs to be the same as others, and what is your own unique thing. And if we can disambiguate those two things, then the content, who creates it and where it gets or whether it gets curated kind of flows from that. So that would be my quick answer to that question.
So we're
maybe-
trying, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to ask to follow up on Chris and Swati's presentation. How do you see your team's role, right? Like, is it more as advisors to other teams, consultants, doers? It seems like they're providing hand-holding, but it's like those touch points, like how frequently do you connect with them? Who does the actual work, etc.?
I'm assuming, Marco, you're asking at a generic level, not specific to the content part of it, right?
Yeah.
Overall, where do we see ourselves, right? So we have had the same conversation discussion. We kind of like a center of excellence, right? So what are places where we can notice and see gaps in how Microsoft is operating in that domain is where we have come in. We help, and with the help of the community, right? So one of the things we realize is no point working in silo ourselves, right? Our advantage is the fact that we have a community of people we're working with. We are actually getting informed from that. So it helps us identify gaps, identify patterns, and at the same time, bring things together to say, oh, by the way, here's places where there could be standardization with still keeping autonomy, right? So one of the things that we always do is we're providing you scaffolding, but without you still have the authority and the direction to decide what applies and what doesn't apply. So that's kind of the role we play. We act as a center of excellence. We provide guidance, expertise. We help identify commonalities, help identify what are some of the, if there's already strong, solid internal or external data, which says this is great to do, we bring that up, right? So in the space of onboarding, there is solid data to say if there's a very few things you can do, they would be make sure your manager has clarity on their role, make sure you assign a buddy, make sure the buddy has clarity on what part they play, how long are they in the picture, and how are they helping the UI, right? As an example. So we bubble that up, right? So we are like, so everybody's not trying to figure that out. We provide that as a pre-existing in knowledge, or we help them share resources, and as Chris mentioned.
Got it. Thank you. Makes sense.
All right.
Sandy, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to check. Sandy, did you have a question? And there's also a question from Jasmine. I don't know if you want to save it for later or.
Let me take
I'm
quick
fine.
look at the question. How about this? How about I go through the rest of it? There's only a few slides, and then we come back to both Jasmine and Sandy's question. Sounds good? All right, so this is more just me sharing very transparently, as I mentioned, just because Microsoft is a big company and been there for years, we know, we understand, we acknowledge there are areas of growth for us, there are areas of development for us. And I'm sharing very transparently, one of the things that we learned in this, when we had aggregated information and assessments from various groups is we realized in the last several years, there were several groups coincidentally who take this assessment who had been formed newly. So they were running so fast, setting up onboarding programs. And as I mentioned, you look at the biggest pain points or the areas that you're most familiar with, you start solving it. And then we realized that one of the data that came up for us is, many of them had not had a chance to pause and look at what aspects of the onboarding are they running manually again and again, right? And although we know, we are working with engineering groups, and we all know, oh yeah, automation, that's why we're there, right? That's our day job. And yet sometimes you forget for something which is happening, it's going so fast, you didn't get a chance to pause. So one of our learnings was realizing one of our groups is doing really great at what they've automated in the onboarding domain, which is making them so much more efficient. And then there were several of these new groups who are still early in this area. And so we realized that pause happened to say, oh, we should redirect, like for some teams, not all, right? But right now is a great time to redirect and automate some aspects of onboarding. And then in our case, one value add was because there were multiple teams, we said, well, why don't we take this as an opportunity to collaborate and get more efficiency through working together rather than trying to solve this problem individually. So they're just sharing that. And then Sandy, as you mentioned, we are figuring out that subject matter experts, right? You mentioned content, but the same applies across the board for everything. So one of our things is figuring out, from teams which are more mature in particular areas, identifying subject matters is what we're going to be working on, so that teams can collaborate better and learn from each other, right? And then can directly go to the subject matter expert to ask their questions and get advice. This is we are ourselves in early stages for this in terms of determining what metrics do we collect and how do we get our own data year over year. So I put it into 3 buckets just for the sake of this conversation, for simplicity. One form of metric is about our program maturity model itself, right? Is it successful or not? Is it adding value or not? And things around it. And so part of it is getting higher adoption is one data point that we're getting. So increasing onboarding program maturity model assessments across all the onboarding programs is one form of metric that we're collecting. The second one is obviously the up leveling of the onboarding programs themselves. And from that perspective, looking at using the maturity model as one of the data points to say, the more mature the programs are, and over year, especially, we'll know that they are moving towards having more holistic, better rounded, and defined onboarding programs. And then the third dimension is obviously the most critical why we are here. The new hires themselves, right? Is this helping the new hire? Is it the final end result is it helping them get a better experience? So the third dimension is the new hire satisfaction surveys, and we are working on connecting the dots between these, right? Having more assessments being done, getting the assessment data to look at maturity of the programs, and we are still in the early phases, right? So we are still setting the stage to get year over year data to help us understand, is our programs maturing? And as they're maturing, the third dimension, which is how is it helping and impacting, increasing new hire satisfaction in the onboarding itself? Does it make sense? Hopefully it does. Okay, so where are we at and where are we going? So we had, the first thing we identified is there was a lot of chaos and complexity in how onboarding was getting done. So we said, okay, let's move from chaos and complexity to clarity and simplicity and starting to gather impact. And now we are in the next stage where we actually paused. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, obviously we learned that there's value of the program, but there are gaps in our maturity model too, right? We recognize where could we make it better? Where could we add more value? What else could we do? Where could we provide more guidelines and, do other ways of, deeper assessment? We know that that's there in our future. But before we go forward, we actually realize this is a good time to actually let us have more assessments come in, because that itself is super powerful. Where we stand today already, we are getting, it is useful. So instead of us continuing to work on making it even better and doing another round, let's actually get more groups to do the assessments is part one. And second is let the data start speaking for itself. Because going back to my earlier slide, we want to collect different metrics to understand, is the program itself successful? Are the teams benefiting? And what are the patterns that we are recognizing in our company's strengths and areas of opportunity. So right now, what we are doing actually is we are ourselves letting the program run by itself in terms of gathering more assessments and letting the data speak for itself. And then we will revisit this in 3 to 6 months, look at what we are learning from there, and then figure out how to learn and evolve it over time. All right, so that's it from my side. Let me look at if I can quickly answer some questions. Jasmine, give me a quick few seconds to read your question.
I kind of already answered her question in my response.
Oh, you did? All right. Okay, cool.
It's an interesting topic.
Maybe the question she wanted, but it's an honest answer.
Okay. All right.
I'd love to have a brainstorming session just on this topic in the future, because I think there is so much potential and I'm really excited about it.
Agreed. I think it would be a great topic. I don't know if we have experts yet, but even just a conversation with some questions and just an interactive discussion around it might be a valuable use of time.
Very much. And Jasmine, as you can guess, just after the whole ChatGPT thing has been discussed, now there are internal conversations starting to, right? People are like, how can we use this? How do we make, and it's not just across onboarding, but other places too, right? Definitely, given we are in the space, everybody will think about their space as how do they better it. So, yep, hopefully in a few months, we all have had a chance to look at it, and I, like Chris said, even a discussion between the community would be fantastic. So we all can go try it out and experiment and come back.
Yeah, I think the whole world is looking at ChatGPT. So yeah, super interesting, and thank you again for sharing. Let's see if there are any more questions. If not, what's the best way to reach you, Swati? Is it the Slack or? Yeah,
actually, by the way, I'm glad you guys set up Slack. I joined recently, so that's a great way to reach out to me for sure. You can also reach out to me at my via LinkedIn, so I can send you my LinkedIn profile, so that becomes easy, and I can keep a lookout for messages too.
Cool. Yeah, so we'll share that. Tomomi can make sure that, I know you don't spend a lot of time in Slack, so Tomomi can make sure people get that information. And we'll also be posting this video on YouTube, so people can get access to this as well if they missed out on anything. So there's going to be the artifacts from this talk coming out to the community.
Thank you. And then I know that many people in the group themselves have very mature programs. I know LinkedIn has a fantastic one, and so we of course talk to LinkedIn more. But even the ones who are not connected to Microsoft, do feel free to reach out and give us advice. Like, we would love to learn. If you've learned something that's working great, all power, and help us make our program better as well.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Swati.
For the opportunity.
Of course. Thank you all. And yeah, I'll see some of you on January 18th for collaborative learning talk. And in the meantime, we'll be on Slack and we'll share the artifacts and everything from this talk. And thank you, Swati. Thank you, Microsoft, for actively participating in the community over and over again. So super awesome.
Always happy. Thank you. See ya.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.